the International Soccer Preview. We are Soccer Files Canada. Welcome to our continuation of Series 19. This one looking at the players of the 2023 Asian Cup, due to be played in January 2024. This episode is looking at the players of Uzbekistan. Here we go. Hello and welcome to the International Soccer Preview by Soccer Files Canada. I'm Kevin and this is Series 19 on the players of the 2023 Asian Cup, played in 2024. This episode covers Uzbekistan's players. And we're doing this media cast in two parts. Part one is a look at the candidates for the squad and their likelihood of making it. We think we went into too much detail in previous player media casts we've done, so we're aiming for a lighter, more listener-friendly version this time. Part two will come out when the squad lists are released and the final squad selected. We think that will be in late December. And we'll go back over the list that we create here at that time and see who made it and who didn't. And we'll also cover some other things, but we'll preview that at the end of the podcast in part two. So we have made a separate video on what we will be covering for the next 9 months. YouTube watchers can see the link to that on the screen, and it can also be found in the show notes for both watchers and listeners. In short, we're focused on the Asian and African Cups, both of those taking place in early 2024. And we have also started coverage of World Cup 2026. So this episode will have 3 sections. Section 1, where we give some general information on the team. Section 2 is the main part, where we look at the main candidates in each position and judge their likelihood of making the squad. And section 3, where we give any closing thoughts and we preview part 2, which will come out probably in December or early January. Okay, let's begin then. And we begin with section 1, some general information about the squad. So let's first talk about a few players that have retired. And we won't go into too much detail on them, but first one is goalkeeper Ignatiy Nestorov. He has 106 caps over the period of 2002 to 2019, and he retired from international soccer after the 2019 Asian Cup, where he was a starter. Nestorov is actually the only man ever to play in 5 Asian Cups. His first one was in 2004. He was just a substitute there that year, and then 2007 also a substitute, but he did play in both of those tournaments and then was a starter in the 2011, 2015 and 2019 Asian Cups there. So that was his last game in the 2019 Asian Cup. Next we have a central defender. This is the second of 4, by the way, that we'll look at. This is Anzur Ismailov. So Anzur Ismailov had 103 caps and 3 goals over the period of 2007 to 2019, and he was a sub in the 2007 tournament and a starter in the 2011, 2015 and 2019 tournaments. We also have Islam Tuktakujayev. Islam Tuktakujayev was with the team from 2009 to 2021, 74 caps and 2 goals. And his first tournament was the Asian Cup in 2015, so not selected for the 2011 tournament. And he was a sub in both that and in the 2019 tournament, although in 2019 he did gain a starting position after game 1. And finally, we have Odil Amadev. He's coded as a defensive or central midfielder, and I believe he sometimes played in central defense. He was captain of the team and had 108 caps and an impressive 21 goals over the course of 2007 to 2021. So he retired a bit later than the others, playing after the Asian Cup. So he played in the 2011, 2015 and 2019 Asian Cups and was a starter in all of those. So yeah, 4 big players lost now to Uzbekistan, but we'll see soon that they have some good youth coming up to replace them. And most of those retired 4 years ago, so they've had plenty of time to replace them. So another note on the team is that they do have some promising youth coming through. Uzbekistan won the under-23 Asian Cup in 2008 and came second in 2022, and that promising crop is now making its way into the senior team there. And the next thing we'll look at is club affiliations for Uzbekistan. So about 65% of them play in Uzbekistan, and they have 4 players in Russia, and maybe this is going into too much detail, but 2 players in Turkey and in United Arab Emirates, and then 1 player in France, Italy, and Greece. So the clubs there, the Russian clubs, are pretty good ones. One of them is CSKA Moscow, and another is Rubin Kazan, and those are both pretty big clubs. Their top scorer plays for I'm never sure how to say it, Cagliari in Italy, who was actually promoted to Serie A in Italy. And yeah, we won't go into the other teams. The French team is Lens, by the way. So some good club affiliations for Uzbekistan, and I have the feeling that they're going to be looking to do a little better here, having not reached the final round of World Cup qualifying. And that brings us into the next section, which is their recent games. So we'll just kind of summarize. They had 3 friendlies from January to March in 2022. So when we look at the players, we'll be covering their participation over the last 2 years. So these are the games that we won't be talking about specifically, but we'll be looking at when we get to the players. In June of 2023, they had 3 Asian Cup qualifying games. That was the second round of Asian Cup qualifying, and they were in that round because they hadn't made it to the final round of World Cup qualifying. That's why I think they'll be highly motivated here, and they seem to have the talent to do it, as we'll see. In November 22 and March 2023, they had, I believe it was 4 friendly games. Anyway, a series of friendlies. And in June of 2023, they hosted, or perhaps co-hosted, the CAF Nations Cup, the Central Asian Football Association Cup. And actually, that was the first local cup in that region. That region was recently formed in 2014, and it took them until 2023 to have their first cup. But as we've noted in the group and team podcast, the local tournaments in Asia are fairly important, especially compared to other regions. So CAF Nations Cup there, and then they had 2 friendlies in September and 2 friendlies in October, and we will focus on those a little bit more because it's recent participation, and we'll be wanting to see who has played for the team recently. Formations is a much more difficult discussion because boy oh boy, Uzbekistan sure experiment a lot with different formations. So I've tried to kind of summarize all these games they've played, and there's really no pattern to it. They just seem to try a new formation every game, but there are a couple of patterns. I mean, generally it is 4 at the back and 1 player up front, but And that is in the games up until September. We'll talk about recent games separately, but they have had 5 at the back. They have had 3 at the back. They've had 2 up front. They've even had a 4-3-3 with 3 up front. But these are usually just 1 or 2 games, and then they switch to another formation. So a lot of experimentation there for Uzbekistan. But maybe it's more important to look at their recent games, because that might be what they take into the cup. And over the course of the last 4 games, they have had 3 central defenders, with the right back and left back moving up the field and playing as a winger. For the most part, it is the left backs and right backs, but sometimes it's left wingers or right wingers. Okay, that is the formations that we're looking at. And finally, we'll look at their upcoming game. So they have their first World Cup 2026 qualifiers coming up in November. And they start with a really tough one. It is Iran at home. Iran is actually part of that CAFA nations, Central African nations. Central Asian nations, and they won that tournament, even though Uzbekistan had the advantage of home field. So Iran, a pretty tough customer to begin their a pretty tough a tough customer to begin their campaign with. And then we have Turkmenistan away. So we have done actually the previews for the groups and teams on that one, so you can check out our thinking. It's not our purpose here to really get into that. By the way, that Iran game is on November 15th, and the away game with Turkmenistan. Oh no, I've got it all backwards here. The away game with Turkmenistan is their first one on November 15th, and then the home game with Iran is on November 20th. Sorry about that. And in terms of games beyond that, they probably will schedule a couple of friendlies before the Cup, but they haven't done so yet. So nevertheless, I think especially against Iran, but I would imagine in both games that we can expect them to put out their best players, and so that'll give us an indication, a better indication of who they are thinking of for the Cup itself. All right, that is the end of part 1, and now we move on to section 2 to look at the candidates. And we begin with the manager, who we would consider a definite candidate. It is Sreko Katanec, and he has been the manager of Uzbekistan since 2021. So even though they kind of disappointed in the World Cup qualifying for 2022, not reaching the final round there, they kept him on, and he will lead them through this tournament. He's a very experienced international manager. He was manager of Iraq's national team 2018 to 2021, and 2 times manager of Slovenia's national team. That was 2013 to 17, and then earlier 1998 to 2002, leading Slovenia through a very good period in their history. And he has also managed the Macedonia national team and United Arab Emirates national team. So in terms of tournaments, he took Slovenia through Euro 2000 and their qualification for the World Cup in 2002. I actually watched them play a game in Busan in Korea, because I was living there at the time. He also managed the United Arab Emirates in the 2011 Asian Cup, and finally manager of Iraq during the 2019 Asian Cup. So the 2023 Asian Cup will be his 5th tournament. As a player, he was part of the Yugoslavia national team from 1983 to 90 with 30 caps and 5 goals there, and also part of the new Slovenia national team in 1994 with 5 caps and 1 goal there, as well as a club career where he played for Sampdoria in Italy, Stuttgart in Germany, and then some of the bigger clubs in Yugoslavia. So a very experienced player and manager, Sreko Katanec, and he will be leading Uzbekistan through this tournament. Next, we look at goalkeepers, and we'll begin by talking about the names first. We'll just introduce the names. So we have as a definite candidate Utkir Yusupov. And well, we'll talk in detail about them soon. Next, we have two candidates at the likely level. So that is Botarali Ergashev and Abduvohid Nemetov. Neither of those have tournament experience. That's why their names are in lighter gray. And then we have one possible candidate in Umidon Ergashev, sometimes called Umid Ergashev. And finally, a possible but unlikely candidate in Valijon Rahimov. We won't do much more than mention his name at this point. So he's possible but unlikely. And if he comes into the picture more, then we will actually add him to the list. So I'm not even going to put him on the list unless he comes out in the final squad there. And we did mention the retired goalkeeper Ignatiy Nestorov. So in fact, none of these players have more than 20 caps. It was hard for them to get games under ahead of Ignatiy Nestorov. But clearly the starting keeper looks like it's going to be Utkir Yusupov. He's a definite candidate, and he's been with Uzbekistan since 2018 and was a backup goalkeeper in the 2019 Asian Cup, but he only has 17 caps, and all of them have been earned over the last 2 years after the retirement of Nestorov. He's played 17 of their 20 games over the last 2 years and was on the bench for 3 others. So looks very likely to be the starter. Botarali Ergashev is the first of our likely candidates, and he's been with the team even longer, since both of them since 2018, but he's earned only 2 caps in his years with the team, and he was actually off the team for a while. He returned after a 1.5 year absence in September 2022 to start one of the remaining 14 games, and he was also subbed in for one and on the bench for 10. And not selected for 2 others. So after his absence, he seems pretty steady. I would guess actually he's the second string keeper here. And the next likely candidate is Abduvohid Nemetov. So he has been with the team since 2020, and he also returned after an absence, a 15-month absence, the same time as Ergashev came back into the team in September 2022. And he started one of their remaining games and was on the bench for 10. And but he was also with the under-23 team for 2 games and not selected for 1 other. So seems a half a step behind Ergashev, but Abduvohid Nemetov nevertheless a likely candidate. The possible candidate is Umid Ergashev, so not to be confused with Botarali Ergashev. And Umidon Ergashev doesn't have any caps for the national team. He's a young player at 24 years old, which is actually older than Nemetov, who is 22 years old. And Umidon Ergashev, he had been called up to the bench for 2 games in the spring of 2018 and 1 game in September 20. So was kind of on and off the team, just getting a look in. And he returned after a 16-month absence in January 2022. Didn't start any games, but he was on the bench for 8 games. The most recent of those was in September, so he's still in the picture, but there were 10 games that he wasn't selected for. So he seems he seems behind Ergashev and Nemetov, Botarali Ergashev and Nemetov, but there is still a chance that he will make it onto the squad. So in summary, it seems quite set with Utkir Yusupov as the starter, and Botarali Ergashev and Abdu Vohid Nemetov as the backups. But there is a chance that Umijan Ergashev can get in there. And that's it for goalkeepers. We move on to defenders, and we will start with central defenders here. And here we have a definite candidate in Umar Eshmuradov. Umar Meshmuradov, a definite candidate, and Husnudin Alikulov as a likely candidate. And there are two other likely candidates too, Rustam Ashurmatov and Abdullah Abdullayev. So one definite, three likely. And then we have two possible candidates in Abdu Kodir Kusanov and Alibek Davronov. Okay, and we will mention, actually we will add to the list Sakjod Azmedinov. He's possible but unlikely, but since he did play recently, we'll just add him to the list. And then we have a few players who are off. In fact, two of them are the retired players that we mentioned. So Anzur Ismailov and Islam Tuktakujayev. So these players that we'll be looking at are coming in to replace those long-standing central defenders. The other one who seems to be off the squad is Islam Kobilov, and we won't add him to the list, but there's always an outside chance of those players coming back. So at least we'd said the name and have covered ourselves. Okay, Umar Eshmudurov is the definite candidate. And it's also the case here that none of the players here have more than 25 caps. I was going to say 20 caps, but I see that Rustam Ashmuratov has 24, or probably 26 because I didn't update it. Fairly inexperienced players as far as the national team goes. So they may feel the pinch of the retirement of those two veterans. Anyway, Umar Eshmuradov does not have any Asian Cup experience. None of these central defenders do. He's been with the team since 2020, and he has 18 caps and 1 goal. He's 29 years old, so that's a relatively limited number of caps. However, since the retirement of those two players, he's started 16 of their 20 games in the last 2 years, subbed in for 1 and on the bench for 2. So just 1 game that he wasn't selected for. So it's not only a definite candidate to make the squad here, but likely, very likely a starter. Next, we look at the 3 likely candidates, beginning with Husnudin Alikulov, and he's been with the team since 2020 and has 14 caps, and he started 11 of their 20 games over the last couple of years, subbed in for 1 and on the bench for 2, and not selected for 6 matches. So he plays for Rizespor in Turkey, so one of the Turkish players we mentioned, and we consider him a likely candidate. Also likely is Rustam Ashurmatov. He is almost always a central defender, but has played as a right defender. Recently, though, it is central defense, and he was selected actually in 2017 for the first time, but didn't make the Asian Cup squad in 2019. But he does have 24 caps now, and he plays for Rubin Kazan in Russia since recently, since 2023, having been in Uzbekistan before. But he also played for a couple of clubs in South Korea. Okay, so Rustam Ashurmatov has started 10 of their 20 games over the past 2 years, subbed in for 1 and on the bench for 4, and not selected for 5 others. So his participation quite similar to Husnudin Alikulov there. The third likely candidate is Abdullah Abdullayev, and actually he switches back and forth from defensive midfield to central midfield, to central defense, but more often recently has been a central defender. He also switches back and forth from being a starter and a substitute, a bit more than the other two. So Abdullah Abdullayev has been with Uzbekistan since 2021 and has 13 caps. And he is one of the players who plays in the UAE, United Arab Emirates. So he started 8 of their 20 games over the past 2 years, subbed in for 3 and on the bench for 7. Only 2 matches that he wasn't selected for. So called up a bit more regularly than the other 2, but starts a bit less regularly. Nevertheless, we consider them all likely. The 2 possible candidates, the first is Abdulkadir Kusanov, and he's been with the team just since 2023 and has earned 3 caps. He's only 19 years old, and he probably has one of the biggest club affiliations on the squad. He plays for Lens in France. And he got his first cap in June of 2022 and started 3 of their remaining 8 games, as well as subbing in for 2 and appearing on the bench for 1. And he's been with the under-23 team for a couple of matches also. The other one, Alibek Davronov, is also very young, 21 years old, and he started just 1 of their 20 games from January. I'll just say over the last 2 years, subbed in for 2 and on the bench for 5, and with the under-23 team also for 2 games, only 2 games that he wasn't selected for. So they have a decent chance because Uzbekistan will probably bring 5 or 6 central defenders. These 2 will probably be substitutes there. And so in summary, we'll say that again, if you think back to the formations we talked about, it usually was a 4-man back line. That would mean 2 central defenders and 2 right back and a left back. But recently they've been going with 3 at the back over the last 4 games. So basically it's a fairly even mix of Eshmuradov plus 2 of the other players. And fairly evenly distributed there, but Eshmuradov usually kind of the anchor there. Okay, that is central defense, and we'll move on to the left back position. And we begin with Farouk Saifiev. Farouk Saifiev as a likely candidate, and then Shurzad Nasrullayev also as a likely candidate. And just one more, a possible candidate in Ibrahim Halil Yuldashev. Okay, so let's take a look at these 3 players. Farouk, among them all, is the only one to have played in the 2019 Asian Cup. In fact, he was even in the 2015 Asian Cup, although he saw no action there. And he was just a sub in the 2019 Asian Cup, and a bit of a surprise selection for that squad because he had been off the squad for a while. So since his first cap in 2014, he has 44 caps and 1 goal, and he started 12 of their 20 games over the last 2 years, was subbed in for 2 and on the bench for 1, so not selected for 5 matches. So Farouk Saifiev, a likely candidate. Also Shurzad Nasrullayev, he has been with the team just since 2022, but he has 12 caps, and he got his first cap in January 2022 and started 10 of the remaining 20 games, and he was subbed in for 4 and on the bench for 2. He was injured for 3, so there's just 1 match that he wasn't called up for, and so in a sense he's a little bit ahead of Saifiev for the starting position, but we'll talk about that after introducing the possible candidate, Ibrahim Khalil Yuldashev. So he has been with the team since 2020, 16 caps and 1 goal, which is pretty good. He's 22 years old, and he plays for a smaller club in Russia. And he returned after an 8-month absence in September 2022 and started just one of their remaining 14 games, but he was subbed in for 3 and on the bench for 3, and not selected for 5 matches during that time, including the last 2 matches. He was with the under-23 team for a couple of games too. So the fact is that Yuldashev seems to be drifting off the team in recent times, and this would be his second time drifting off the team a little bit. So he seems to kind of come in and out. In summary of this part, the left back position becomes a left wing position when there are 3 central defenders. But that left wing position is usually played by the left back. The same is going to be true on the right side. Only once did one of these players play as a left central defender. So generally they move up the field. And Safiev and Nasrullayev seem to share it quite evenly, as we've seen. So one of them starting 12 games, one of them starting 10 games out of the 20. So they've been on the field a couple of times at the same time, but generally share this position. And as I said, on the right back, it's the same. Recently, that has been a right wing position. But in this case, we have a definite candidate in Kojiakbar Alijonov. Alijonov. And we also have a possible candidate in Dilshod Saitov. And then we'll just mention the possible but unlikely candidate, Said Zamat Mursadov. Said Zamat Mursadov. But that's all we'll do. We won't actually put him on the list, but we'll bring him up again if he shows up on the final roster. So let's go back to Kojiakbar Alijonov. And he has been with the team since 2019 with 28 caps and started 12 of their 20 games over the past 2 years. Was subbed in for 2 and on the bench for, subbed in for 4 and on the bench for 2. So just 2 times that he was not selected. And the possible candidate, Dilshod Saitov, actually seemed like a fairly likely candidate until missing the 2 games in October. So Dilshod Saitov has been with the team since 2021 and has 8 caps. And 7 of those came in the past 2 years, 7 starts in the past 2 years, and 6 appearances on the bench. But there were 7 matches that he wasn't selected for, including those 2 in October. So on the right side, rather than these 2 sharing the role, it seems like Alijonov, a more likely candidate, holding down the position regularly in recent times. And Dilshod Saitov moved actually from a likely to a possible candidate due to missing those 2 games. Okay, that brings us to the end of defense, and so we move on to look at midfielders, and we're going to list with the defensive midfielders first. But as with many teams, there's not really a big difference between central defense and central midfielder and defensive midfielder. And in fact, we only have a couple of players coded as defensive midfielders at the possible but unlikely level, and that is Sardar Saburkojayev and the retired player that we mentioned earlier, Odil Amadov, who had 108 caps, moving out of this position. But generally, we're going to see that it's filled with central midfielders rather than players coded as defensive midfielders. But we will put Sardar Saburkojayev on the list because he was on the Central Asian Football Association Cup squad for the first two games, which is fairly recent. That was in June. But though he was called up to the tournament and played in the first two games, he was then off the squad for the last two games, and he hasn't returned since. So he didn't play any of the four games in the September and October here. So that makes us put him as possible, but unlikely. But we'll put his name on the list because he has appeared relatively recently. And that's all we have for players coded as defensive midfielders. So most of the players occupying this position will be central midfielders, even if they do play a more defensive role, as we'll see shortly. We have two definite candidates here in Otabek Shukurov and in Odil Hamrobekov, sometimes called Odil John Hamrobekov. Sometimes Uzbeks add the John on the end of the name, although I haven't figured out what that actually means yet. But Odil or Odil John Hamrobekov, also a definite candidate. And we have two possible candidates in Aziz John Ganiev, also called Aziz Ganiev, and Akmal Mozgovoy, Akmal Mozgovoy. And we do have one possible but unlikely candidate in Abror Ismoilov, and we will put him on the list since he appeared fairly recently. And we have Javokir Sidikov, who seems to be off the squad. So last appeared for the national team in March 2022. So we won't put Sidikov on the list here. We'll go back and look at the players. So Otabek Shukurov has been with the national team since 2016 and has 57 caps and 4 goals. And he's another of the player who plays in Turkey. And he was a starter in the 2019 Asian Cup. In the last 2 years, he started 18 of their 20 games, subbed in for 1 and not selected for 1. So always selected to be on the field is Otabek Shukurov. If you think back to the what we said about the formations, we saw that they're really experimenting in the middle here. So there may be anywhere from 1 to 3 central midfielders. And if they have one, they tried a 4-1-4-1 formation, for example. It was the next candidate, Odil John Hamrobekov, who played as a stopper. So as I said, not a lot of difference between central midfielder and defensive midfielder. But they'll probably we'll probably think of it in terms of 2 central midfielders starting. Odil John Hamrobekov has been with the team since 2017 and has 41 caps. And he was on the roster for the 2019 Asian Cup, but he didn't get onto the field, just a substitute there. However, over the past 2 years, he started 16 of their 20 games, and he was subbed in for 2 and on the bench for 1. So, like Ganiev there, he has, like Shukurov, I should say, he has only not been selected for 1 match. So these two are real anchors in the central midfield and almost always start. Nevertheless, we have 2 possible candidates. Aziz John Ganiev, he started 2 of their 20 games over the past 2 years, was subbed in for 2 and on the bench for 3. So 13 matches that he wasn't selected for. And he only has 13 caps since his first in 2017. So a little tough to break into the team with Hamrobekov and Shukurov always starting. He was called up for all 4 recent games, was Ganiev, and not called up much before that. So he may be making inroads into the team here. He's one of the players who plays for in the United Arab Emirates for Shabab Al Ahly. Looking a little better for him in recent times. The second possible candidate is Akmal Mozgoyov. and he started 3 of their 20 games over the past 2 years, subbed in for 1 and on the bench for 7, and not selected for 9 matches, including the last 2 matches. So just a possible candidate there. But, you know, I wouldn't be surprised to see them at the Cup as substitutes. Finally, we have Abror Ismailov, who's possible but unlikely. But he did sub in for 2 games in September, and then he was back off the team. So just popped his head in September there, but wasn't on the team for a while before that. And that was a 2-year absence. So he 2 years absent, came back in September for 2 games, and then disappeared again. So we'll have to see, but there is an outside chance for him. However, as a summary of this section, it looks definitely like Shukurov and Hamrobekov, especially if they just have 2 central midfielders. And there is a mild chance for the Ganiev and Mozgoyov, but they are more likely substitutes. Okay, let's move on to left midfield. And actually for players coded as left midfielders, there are not many, and that's true of right midfielders too. So generally it will be the left and right backs, as we saw, moving up to play a winger role. And then it'll be the wingers or attacking midfielders playing further up the field. So nobody really coded as a left midfielder, except for Dostonbek Kamadov. Dostonbek Kamdamov, who is a possible but unlikely candidate here. And he was a regular call-up until the end of 2022, but then dropped off the team precipitously. I don't think he played any games in 2023. However, you know, he is a bit of a veteran on the team, being with them since 2016, with 34 caps and 5 goals. So wouldn't be surprised to see him come back. He was part of the Asian Cup 2019 squad. Just recently hasn't been called up, but may do so. And we have 2 left midfielders who are seemingly off the squad. So one is Azizbek Amanov. He last played in June 2022. And Oybek Bozorov last played in September 2022. So we won't add them to the list because they seem well off the squad. Right midfielders, we have no players coded as right midfielders. So we move on to left wingers. And we start with a definite candidate in Jaloliddin Marsharapov. And one possible candidate in Kolimat Erkinov. So let's go back to Masharapov, and he plays in Saudi Arabia. I think we forgot to mention that. Oh, the reason we didn't mention it earlier on is because he was maybe on loan to that same club in the United Arab Emirates. Okay, and he's been with Uzbekistan since 2016 and has 51 caps and 10 goals. And he was a starter in the Asian Cup in 2019. And in the last 2 years has started 15 of their 20 games. And he was actually sick for 1 game and not selected for 4 matches. So he's coded as a left winger, but actually usually plays as a left attacking midfielder or even as a left forward when they use 2 or 3 forwards. So definitely an attacking player is Jaloliddin Masharapov. I have trouble with that name. Okay, and then we look at the possible candidate in Kojimat Erkinov, and he has been with the team since 2020 and has 19 caps and 3 goals, just 22 years old, and he plays for Torpedo Moscow in Russia, although he's currently on loan to a team in Uzbekistan since 2023. Urkinov started 6 of their 20 games over the past 2 years, but all of them were in 2022. And then he subbed in for 4 games. All of those were in 2023. He was on the bench for 1, injured for 2, and with the under-21 team for 7 others, including the last 5 matches. So there's definitely kind of a drop-off in his participation. Starting quite a few games in 2022, not many games in 2023 in a sub when he did play, and now kind of not appearing for the senior team. So we have him as a possible candidate. And there's not much to talk about with the position here, because these left wingers kind of just joined the attacking midfielders, or are just in the upper left quadrant of the field, is maybe a good way to think about it. And sometimes may move to the center or even to the right side sometimes. Okay, we have 2 right wingers, both at the possible level. The first one is Jasirbek Yakshiboev, and he's possible. And we also have Abosbek Feyzulayev, also at the possible level. And then we have a player who seems to be off the squad in Shokbaz Umarov, last appeared in September 2022. So we won't put him on the list, and we'll take a look at these 2 candidates. So Jasirbek Yakshiboev has been with the team since 2018, but rarely gets on the field. 8 caps, but he's made the best of it with 2 goals there. And returned after a 2.5-year absence in March 2023 to start 2 of their remaining 10 games. But was subbed in for 5 and not selected for 3 others. So recently getting some action, and he started as a right winger in 1 game and as a right forward in his other start. So that kind of verifies what I said about left wingers as well, playing as attacking midfielders or even forwards. The other candidate, Abosbek Feyzulayev, only has 3 caps for the national team. He's just 20 years old. He's the one who plays for CSKA Moscow, CSKA Moscow in Russia since 2023. They seem to have maybe an arrangement with Pakhtakor Tashkent. That's the biggest team in Uzbekistan. So perhaps that's a bit of a conduit to Russian teams. Feyzulayev got his first cap in June of 2023 and didn't start any of the remaining 8 games, but was subbed in for 5 and on the bench for 1. And the other 2 games he was with the under-23 team. So both of these possible players are seeing increasing action recently, and I wouldn't be surprised to see them make it to the squad. Feyzulayev was called up fairly consistently recently, but is definitely a substitute, whereas Yakshiboev has a couple of starts under his belt at least. So that's the right wing, or again, if you think of it as the right upper quadrant of the field. But for the most part, it is the attacking midfielders who play those roles in the upper left and the upper right, apart from Masharipov, who is quite consistently there. But we have 3 likely candidates in the attacking midfield position. And so we are moving on to forwards, because we begin with attacking midfielders when we talk about the forwards. And the first of the 3 is Azizbek Turgimboev. Azizbek Turgimboev, a likely attacking midfielder. The next one is Oston Uranov. And the third one is Jamshid Iskandarov, I should say. We'll just deal with a couple of other players here. A possible but unlikely is Jamshid Boltaboev. but he, let me see, returned after a 6.5-year absence in June 2023 and started one game, but then was not selected. Started one game, was on the bench for one game, and not selected for the last 3 matches. So maybe we will put Jamshid Boltaboev on the list, since he has appeared recently and there is a bit of a chance of him coming back. And meanwhile, we'll go back and look at the 3 likely candidates in this position, beginning with Aziz Turgimboev. So Turgimboev was part of the Asian Cup 2019 squad, but just as a substitute there. He got his first cap a year earlier in 2018 and has 22 caps and 2 goals for the team. So he was actually off the team for a little while. He returned after a 13-month absence in March 2022 to start 6 of their remaining 18 games. And he was also subbed in for 6 and on the bench for 4. But not selected for two matches there. So Turgimboev, not necessarily a starter, more likely a substitute than a starter, but he has started on the right recently when he has started, but he also played on the left in the Central Asian Cup there, and is a bit of a rover. It seems, Aziz Bek Turgimboev, a likely candidate. Austin Uranov is the next one, and he returned also after a 15-month absence. He came back in June 2022 and started 5 of the remaining 15 games, and he was subbed in for 9 and on the bench for 2. So just 1 match out of 15 that he wasn't selected for. So definitely will appear, almost definitely will appear on the squad. And he's increasingly been a starter. He started 4 of the last 5 games, so we might even see him as a starter. That's Austin Uranov, a likely candidate. And finally, we have Jamshid Iskandarov, and he was part of the Asian Cup squad in 2015. Where he was a substitute. He got his first cap in 2013 and has 29 caps and 3 goals. But he was off the team a couple of times. Most recently, he returned after a 2-year absence in March of 2023 and started 3 of their remaining 10 games there, as well as subbing into 4 and being on the bench for 3 others. So once he came back, he was back for good. Always being called up. He does seem more of a substitute, Iskandarov, but along with the other 2, seems a likely candidate to make it to the Cup. Okay, and we do have one player who seems to be off the squad now. That is Sardar Rashidov. I should have introduced him a bit earlier, and he was part of the 2015 and 2019 Asian Cups, but he last appeared for the team in March of 2021. So Sardar Rashidov seems to be off the team, even though he's just 32 years old and is still playing club soccer. So again, a slight chance of him coming back, but we're not going to put him on the list here unless his name appears on the final squad. Let's finish then with the actual forwards, and we begin with captain Eldor Shomurodov. Eldor Shomurodov is the captain and a definite candidate. And then we have a likely candidate, Bobur Abdikolikov. Bobur Abdikolikov at the likely level. And then Igor Sergeyev at the possible level. And we have a couple of other candidates, one at the possible but unlikely level, Ruslanbek Gianov. Ruslanbek Gianov, I'll just take a look a bit later and see if we should put him on the list. And then one we won't put on the list is Shirzad Temirov, because he's been off the team since June 2022. So let's go back to the beginning and look at Eldor Shomurodov. And he is playing with, well, he's on the roster of Roma in Italy, actually, but he was loaned to Cagliari since 2023 and has played with a few Italian squads, Spezia and Genoa, and also with Rostov in Russia. So quite a good club career. For Uzbekistan, he has 67 caps and an impressive 37 goals, so that's over 50%. That's amazing. In the Asian Cup 2019, sorry, just let me back up a bit. He got his first cap in 2015, but perhaps that was too late for the 2015 Asian Cup, where he doesn't seem to have been a consideration. And even in the 2019 Asian Cup, he was a substitute in game one and then gained a starting position after that. So at that point, he was in Rostov, playing for Rostov in Russia. And he did score 4 of their 7 goals in that tournament, so kind of made a name for himself there. And he was a top scorer in their World Cup qualifying campaign as well. And over the past 2 years, he started 15 of their 20 games and subbed in for 1 and on the bench for 1 and not selected for 3 others. But a bit concerningly, not selected for the last 2 matches in October. But I'm sure in the case of Shomurodov that doesn't mean much, because it would be shocking if they didn't bring him to the Cup. So for whatever reason he missed those games, we still think he's a definite candidate. The next is Bobur Abdikolikov, and he is a likely candidate. He returned after a 2-year absence in November 2022 and started 2 of their remaining 12 games, as well as subbing in for 6 and being on the bench for 4 others. So having come back from that absence, he's been steadily called up. And he actually plays in Kazakhstan for Ordubasi in Kazakhstan. And he's been with the team since 2018, but only has 9 caps. So nevertheless, he looks like a definite substitute here, but not a likely starter. Next, we have possible candidate Igor Sergayev. And Igor Sergayev was on the squad for the 2015 Asian Cup. He was the top scorer in qualifying there. He started the first 2 games and then lost his starting position. For whatever reason, he was not on the team for the Asian Cup in 2019. But over the past 2 years, he started 3 of their 20 games, including the last 2. Obviously, he was replacing Shomadurov, who was absent for those games, so he got 2 starts there. Otherwise, just 1 start and subbed in for 7 and on the bench for 1, and not selected for 9 matches, and that includes the 8 matches before he returned in October. So he was off the team, but it seems like he came back to fill in for Shomadurov, and a bit up in the air as to whether he's a likely candidate. But he has been with the team since 2013 and has 66 caps and 17 goals. So Igor Sergayev we have as a possible candidate. And the possible but unlikely candidate was Ruslan Bekjianov, and he's been with the under-23 teams for the last 10 matches. That sounds good, but what it really means is he's not been brought up to the senior team, so isn't quite making the senior team. But he was subbed in for 1 game and on the bench for 1 game. I think that's not enough to put him on the list there, but if his name comes back up, we can reintroduce him. Okay, and that brings us to the end of the forwards and the end of our look through the candidate. And I really don't have any closing thoughts. It'll be interesting to see whether they continue with 3 at the back over the as they have over the last 4 games, or will continue experimenting. But it's a fairly settled squad with a lot of the players kind of anchored in their position, or for some positions, a small stable of players kind of rotating the position. As I said, I think Uzbekistan is looking quite good. Some of the youth coming through looking quite strong. So after looking at the players, I actually feel that they may surprise at this Asian Cup. A team that didn't make the final round of World Cup qualifying, but actually usually do. So maybe underrated coming into the tournament, but they are a good and dangerous team. Okay, before we go, we'll just preview part 2 a little bit. So that will come out in late December or early January. And when we do part 2, we'll kind of go through the players that we built, the list that we built here, and talk about which ones made it and which one didn't. So listeners of part 1 will have a good sense of any surprise non-selections from among these players. And then we'll have to add any players that are surprisingly included on the final squad. There's always a couple that we haven't covered, whether they become hot in their club soccer, or whether they come back out of the cold, as we've seen a few players do here, some surprise inclusion. And then there's always a couple of new players too. So we'll take a look at those. And we'll also update injuries there when it's a bit closer to the time. So you can look forward to that in part 2 of the podcast. Okay, we will see you next time. We originally planned to tag on our past, present, and future plans for the mediacast, but we have instead decided to put a link to that 10-minute video in the show notes. It covers what we're working on and what we plan to do over the next 9 months. We'd like to thank Namur Abachan and Pixabay for the wonderful music you hear in this mediacast. The title is called Arabic Trap.